You are listening to the Effective Statistician podcast, a weekly podcast with Alexander Schacht and Benjamin Pieske, designed to help you reach your potential, lead great science, and serve patients without becoming overwhelmed by work. Today I'm talking with Lina about adherence and what is state of the art now. And before we dive into this, I want to mention that currently the Effective Statistician Leadership Program with the Mastermind is available to enroll. We offer this program only once a year. Otherwise, it's only for kind of companies that want to purchase 10s or 20s of slots on it. But now you as an individual can enroll. It will only open again end of next year. So head over to theeffectivestatistician.com, learn more about all this leadership program, which is exactly designed for people like you, and see whether that is something for you. I'm sure if you haven't had a chance to look over it, this will be interesting because there's over 300 people that already went through the program and really had a lot of success with it. So check it out on theeffectivestatistician.com. And now some music. Adherence is such an important topic, and today I'm talking with Lina, who is an absolute expert in this area. She's a psychologist by training, and it is so important because, if you think about S demands and all these kind of different things, for anything that is related to treatment and that is not just policy S demand, that is really, really important, because if you don't know whether people have taken the treatment, well, how can you do any kind of on-treatment estimate? So stay tuned for this really, really nice episode. I'm producing this podcast in association with PSI, a community dedicated to leading and promoting the use of statistics within the healthcare industry for the benefit of patients. Join PSI today to further develop your statistical capabilities with access to the video-on-demand content library, free registration to all PSI webinars, and much, much more. Head over to psiweb.org to learn more about PSI activities and become a PSI member today. Welcome to a new episode of The Effective Statistician. Today I'm talking with Lina Eliasson. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Hi, Lina. How are you doing?
Hi, Alexander. Yeah, that sounds pretty good, that pronunciation. It's Lina Eliasson. So I'm a chartered psychologist and founding partner at Sprout Health Solution, which is a specialist agency that support pharma and biotech companies with clinical outcomes assessment strategies for clinical trials, as well as development of patient services. And really everything we do is about the patient voice, bringing that to the forefront of drug development and the real world.
So what did you study actually?
So I actually studied psychology, and I specialized. I did my PhD in adherence to oral oncology drugs at the UCL School of Pharmacy. So yeah, that's really where the interest comes from.
Cool. Yeah, I'm really interested in psychology for various reasons. One of the things is I worked in the psychiatry space for quite a long time. Mm-hmm. And then every kind of psychiatrist, well-known psychiatrist, has a psychologist that helps him. And that was always kind of, I don't know about statistics, but my psychologists, they do know about statistics. So I always felt like, there's a really, really nice connection with psychology. And the other thing is, whenever, I think about leadership and influencing on all these kind of things, there's so much psychology in there. So maybe in my next life, I'll study psychology instead of statistics, but I don't know.
Yeah, no, that's right. Really, studying psychology, I say to any young people that speak to me about it, they open so much doors. There's so much you can do beyond, the classic therapist space. So it's a really exciting field.
Yeah. And so you already started very early on kind of thinking about adherence. That's the topic of today. Where did that come from? Do you have kind of initial story that kind of triggered that?
Yeah, so I started my PhD was in 2006. I don't know if I just said, but UCL School of Pharmacy. And this time there wasn't a lot of research in adherence in the oncology space. So there were some studies in terms of maintenance therapy for breast cancer, but that was about it. And the first golden bullet medicine had hit the market a few years earlier. So you probably heard about it. It was imatinib, which was a tyrosine kinase inhibitor to treat chronic myeloid leukemia. And there was this curious situation that patients who did respond to imatinib, which was, most of them, I think some 80% or so, but they tend to plateau at different levels. And so some had CML disease that were undetectable, others have some detectable disease, and yet others didn't do really well at all. And, all over the world, research teams were looking into what might cause this difference in response. And the team that I collaborated with, which was led by David Marin, who at that time was at Imperial College London, he had this idea that perhaps people plateaued at different levels because some of them didn't take the drugs as prescribed. And, this was hugely controversial. People were saying, of course, cancer patients take the treatment as prescribed. They have cancer. And, this is an oral treatment. It's easy to take. Side effects were mostly low grade, which, clinicians said that people should just accept. It was a golden bullet. But yeah, we did a trial, monitored patients over 3 months. And sure enough, adherence rate was the strongest predictor of response. And it was quite interesting. The expert community, they responded by saying, oh, look at them at the Hammersmith Hospital, which is where the trial was run. They have a problem with adherence, but we don't at our. It was quite amazing. But the body of evidence grew, the extent and impact of non-adherence to imatinib, and also then to all other oral oncology drugs. And, the community had to accept that non-adherence was indeed a pervasive challenge. And even when we look at life-saving cancer therapies. And it got me hooked. I'm still here.
Yeah, I can completely relate to that. In the early 2000s, I was working on HIV. And it was, the protease inhibitors, drugs that really changed the kind of life expectancy for HIV patients, were introduced just a couple of years earlier, and I'm also working on such a drug. And so I got more into this HIV community, and all these drugs are also, orals. Yeah, it's more or less easy to take. And of course, AIDS is a really, really severe disease. Also 100% mortality rate, and there's no cure from it. So you would think of course patients take that drug. But no, there is a problem with adherence. And there are some studies that were done in prisons where people directly observed how the patients were taking the pills, each pill. And in these studies, response rates were dramatically better than in the usual studies where patients take their pill homes. And so adherence plays a really, really big role, even in these really severe diseases like oncology or HIV. Yeah, so even if we think about it, like you said, side effects, well, your life is at risk. Yeah, don't worry about these side effects. Well, it's always in relationship to all the other things. And of course, we know from our personal lives, we know what healthy lifestyle looks like. Yeah. Do we adhere to it?
No.
So tell me a little bit more about adherence in clinical trials and what research you have done in that part.
Yeah, well, you often hear that adherence is perfect in clinical trials. The evidence shows that suboptimal adherence is common in this setting too. And it's a huge problem. Non-adherence in a trial setting affects the quality of the trials, it affects the cost of the trials. The lost opportunities because we have unduly large sample sizes in the trials. And, there are examples of trials that have been discontinued or seen as failure as treatment effect hasn't been shown. But, post hoc analysis indicate that this was because many participants didn't actually take the drug as intended. And, if you do not measure adherence, but instead make an assumption that adherence is more or less perfect in your analysis, but it isn't, this skews both efficacy and safety data. It can confound dose response estimations and skew results towards overestimating dosing requirements. I think about 20-30% of all drugs approved since the 1980s have been dose adjusted post-market authorization, and up to 80% of those is dose reduction. So it's really suggestion. And I think he also speaks to the point you had about HIV. That is an issue about patients not being adherent to their trial treatments.
Yeah, and maybe it's better to be adherent to a lower dose than to be non-adherent to a higher dose.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting you say that, because one of the patients at the Hammersmith, he had exactly that. So he was non-adherent and we knew it. And, we opened up a discussion with him about it. And he was on 80 milligrams imatinib, which some of the patients who were in the original trials of imatinib and who were on 800, they would be kept on that after the trial had finished during the sort of follow-up period. And when we chatted with him, he just said, look, I just have to take breaks sometimes because I can't manage the side effects. And then, they reduced him down to 400 milligrams. And he was saying to me, I'm really trying to take it now every day because I really wanted to work on this lower dose. And of course, now 400 milligram is the standard dose for imatinib. But so I think you can really make a difference and sort of adjust dosing to a lower dose that might be more, safer for patients to take. Yeah. And you should know that from the trials.
Yes. It's also kind of, just as a side note, of course, that means you need to have some discussions about which estimate you are actually, interested in. With a treatment policy or, the patients that are really taking it, all these kind of different things. Capturing adherence is really a big topic. I know that when I worked on these HIV studies, we had pill counts. So we had for each visit kind of, okay, he should have taken, 20 pills, but he returned, too many, and probably therefore he can maximally have taken 15 or something like this. And then you said, okay, 15 divided by 20, so you said 75% compliance. That was how we dealt with compliance. What do you think about that?
Well, I think, unfortunately, pill count isn't a very accurate measure of adherence, but it's still the most commonly used measure in clinical trials. And of course, like you say, it's reliant on patients bringing back the packaging, and they might do that. They might dump the pills before,
Yes.
Studies where we had some 110, 120, 130% adherence according to pill counts, because, we had put extra pills in the bottles and patients didn't know that. And so they just dumped the rest out with whatever other pills they had left over. So I would say that's not a great measure. And I wish that was spoken about more, because I think, sponsors might feel like they have ticked the box because pill count is in there.
Yeah. And it's also kind of understanding how it's collected, what kind of signals are sent to the patients. Do they kind of get some kind of bias in there? Yeah. Do they have an incentive to throw away all the pills because then they are not yelled at by the physician? These kind of things play a role, really. So what alternative ways are there to capture adherence?
Well, there really isn't a gold standard for capturing adherence, and the measure is recommended based on the specific situation in which adherence will be measured. I think perhaps there's three sort of key steps. The first step, of course, is to clearly define adherence and the outcomes of your interest to your trial. We always use the ABC taxonomy, which was published by Espacomp and Vergens et al., and essentially breaks down adherence into three key behaviors. So it's the initiation of treatment, it's the maintenance of your prescribed treatment over time, and then the point of discontinuation. Then the time period between initiation and discontinuation is referred to as persistent. And this definition really applies whether it's self-administrated, whether it's a supported administration, perhaps a parent administrating a treatment to a child, or if it's a healthcare provider administrating treatment in clinic. And then, of course, secondly, you want the measure to capture the adherence outcome as intended and produce the data you need for your analysis. And I'm sure you will agree, but I would say speak with the lead statistician before you have decided on what particular data points and what measures to use, because they will have invaluable advice on what they need and how the data need to be structured to work for the analysis. And of course, clearly define the objective of the data and how it will be used from the outset is absolutely key. And I think what measure is appropriate, like I said, is dependent on the context of your trial. Who are your respondents? Is it a patient? Is it, who is that patient? Is it an older person? What's the dexterity like? Is it a young person? What type of drug formulation and administration is used and so on. There are hundreds, if not thousands of different measures, self-report, digital technologies, smartphone app, claims and dispensing data. And, it's really about choosing the best for your particular purpose. And then I think finally, and just as important, is that is convenient and acceptable to the responder. And, a measurement that is too cumbersome or is too intrusive or has some other adverse feature will give you inaccurate or missing data. Or worse, trial participants might discontinue the trial, or the site might not want to enroll patient participants in the first place, because they know what it will take to respond to these measures.
What are kind of ways we can encourage adherence in a clinical trial?
Well, I think something really to highlight in relation to that is the insights directly from the patients. To do something about it and to support patients, we need to ask why. If they missed or discontinued a medicine, what was the challenges that they had if they discontinued a trial? Why did they do that? And I think, you could use questionnaires to capture qualitative data, asking the why questions. And the newer method that we are increasingly using it for our sponsors is exit interviews. So, they're typically done at the end of the trial after the primary endpoint have been reached. And you spend, maybe half an hour just having a chat about, obviously you have a discussion guide, but you ask them about the experience during the trial. And it's an opportunity to ask them about the treatment that they received. And I think once you start understanding the whys, that's where, you can help and support patients.
That's a good point. I think this getting first-hand experience about what the patients really care about helps you a lot later on to, for following up trials, see about kind of, are there specific points you need to talk about? You need to set expectations. What are the things that you need to do later on if you have launched the product? Increase adherence. Yeah, because in the end, if patients don't take the drug, stop the drug, it will not help the patient. Yes, it's that simple. Yeah. And so we need to kind of have a really open and honest discussion about this. Yeah. I know that perceptions can be very, very different. I once was working on a drug that was for psoriasis, and it has this little side effect that the injection were a little bit painful. And there was some injection side reactions also. Not something that, anybody in the safety department, the FDA, the EMA, whatsoever really cared about. Yeah. Oh, that's minor. But in real life, it was a topic. And so don't think, like it's the same like with the oncologist that, well, these side effects should be bearable. It's about, life and death. Don't just assume that what your point of view is, what your perception is the same for the patient.
Yeah, totally agree.
Yep, very good. Let's go. You mentioned kind of digital and smartphones and things like this. What have you seen there in terms of capturing or improving adherence?
There is a lot. It's a fast evolving field. And in the early days, we have the microelectronic monitoring caps, so putting on medical bottles and it recorded the opening. And now, those kind of technologies have extended to blister packs, and there are dosing machines and the microchips that are embedded into the formulation of the drug. So it can be inside the tablet that sends signals when it's ingested. Obviously, if you have a delivery device, an inhaler, or like you mentioned, an injection pen, then digital monitors can be sort of embedded in there that send signals when the drug is administered. And of course, some of those or many of those comes with sort of platforms with dashboards or interfaces for sometimes the patients so they can see data, or, in a trial setting, the site staff have access, and the clinical research organization that the sponsor works with might have access, and so on. So it's a lot of the digital technology. And obviously we also have all of the applications on smartphones, tablets that you can use to self-record, or indeed video recordings, or sometimes the video, it doesn't capture the picture, they capture the movement. So you still have unidentifiable data of ingestion, but people can use those interfaces on the smart devices.
Yeah, that is a way how you can directly interact with the patient, send them reminders, give them incentives so that, when they take it, that they kind of see how they're improving. There's probably lots of different opportunities to help patients be more kind of adherent.
For me, one of the most interesting ones, and you just touched on it there as well, Alexander, but it's that you can combine data. So, you have these trackers where patients can track their adherence, and that's captured within the system, but you can also feed in data. And, sometimes that is about actually being able to connect to digital health records, but it might just be manual entry, but to be able to see how your adherence change over time and how your response change over time, and, how your then outcomes or even adverse effects or side effects change over time with your treatment. That's hugely interesting. And of course, motivating for patients if it goes in the right direction. And if it isn't going in the right direction, then that's really something that the patient, and in particular the healthcare team and the prescriber, needs to know.
Yeah, it's about really, I think it's kind of to build up a habit of being adherence. I'm just thinking about the book that I read about habits, Atomic Habits. Do you know about that one? It talks about kind of these 4 parts of a habit, from the trigger up to the reward. And, you can think about these 4 things in a similar way. If you want to have patients develop a habit of taking their medicine. I'm taking a pill every morning and I have a habit around it, be adherent. And so helping patients kind of establish these habits and have maybe technologies that support that, that's just really, really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, these technologies also provide channels to deliver other information. So, habit formation is something which is really important and is a powerful, what we call behavior change technique, or, the active ingredients in the psychological interventions. But there are also other behavior change techniques that can be used. So say it might be that the patient have certain concerns over side effects, and some of that might be because of the experience. They have experienced something, but it might also be that they have read something, and it could be that that's accurate or not, and if we have channels to connect with the patient to provide them with accurate information, which is addressing some of those barriers that they might have in terms of managing their treatment and their disease, or other health behaviors that they want to stick with around, but that could be diet or exercise or whatever it could be. That's really valuable to us as well. And I think it's important to sort of highlight that it isn't just about forgetting and getting used to something, but there is a lot of other barriers. It could be around your actual capability of doing something, your dexterity, say, or it could be something in your environment, your support network, and, what we can do and support people there. And then, of course, motivation is the big one. And the way that we work, we look at motivation as the sort of conscious ideas and emotions and beliefs that you have that drive your behavior, but also the automatic ones, and habit would fall in that sort of automatic motivation that people have.
I love that. There's so much kind of psychology, obviously, that working with a psychologist will be super, super helpful to increase adherence. And maybe that's the one thing that you have the biggest impact on to help have a high probability of success for your study. And especially not end up with a study in the end that is kind of, just wasted because of lack of adherence. And I love that this also helps you to really understand what will be then the barriers in the real world. I know that many companies have these patient support programs to help patients stay on treatment, remove all kind of different barriers, and especially kind of for the more costly patients, for the more costly drugs. It makes a lot of sense to invest into these areas. And all the research, all the learning that you have gathered through your clinical trials, for example, working with Sprout, you can get so much knowledge into making sure that your drug is then also effective in the real world.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there is no arguing that the care and the monitoring that participants get within a trial setting is different from clinical practice. It's often more comprehensive, and that might influence patients' treatment experience. But there is still an opportunity to learn a lot about, the challenges they had, the opportunities that they saw with the trial treatment, the clinical outcomes of importance to them, and understanding that. And what they think might be helpful for people who are prescribed this medicine in the real world, because of course they're the experts of their condition and they understand what it's like living in the real world with that condition and not having access to the treatment that they have just received in the trial. So I think that this is hugely valuable to support the development of support services that can be marketed alongside the drug and inform measurement strategies also for real world studies. And I encourage people to take the opportunity to learn as much as you can from the participants in your trial. It's not always that the way you measure things fit or capture everything that they want to say. And usually participants really value being able to share their experience in their own world with someone, and that is captured and beneficial to their community out there.
Where these exit interviews really come into place, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Where they can be much more open in the way that they discuss their outcomes. We use the exit interviews also to help interpret the results of the clinical outcomes assessments, of the patient-reported outcomes measures that were used in the trial, because we can ask them, what's the difference to you? We can help to provide further sort of validation and weight to those measures. And I think, something which is a big difference in the real world compared to a trial is that a clinical trial is short-term, but the treatment is often lifelong. So over a lifetime, things change, not just physically and medically, but we spoke about capabilities and motivation and opportunities to stick with treatment recommendations change over time. Your ideas and beliefs change over time. And that really needs to be considered when trying to understand adherence in the real world and from the perspective of the individual.
Yeah, because if you have kind of a lot of patients in a clinical trial, you can gain kind of experiences from lots of different situations, from more older people, from people that kind of live in different circumstances, go through life crisis, and how do you then deal with these kind of situations? And you can take these learnings and to improve adherence and plan for contingency in the real world to ensure that there's always questions being answered for the patients, that you have a channel where patients can even ask these kind of questions. As a statistician, I have one question about the exit interviews. How do you capture the data from these exit interviews?
Yeah, well, usually recordings, an interviewer, and sometimes the interviews are done by site staff. So then we would train the site staff to conduct the interviews. And so we prepare a structured interview guide, and we train the site staff to do the interviews and ask the questions. And they are then audio recorded, and that audio recording is sent for transcription. And during transcription, they make sure to remove any remaining identifiable information. And then those transcripts comes to us for thematic analysis. And there might be specific research questions before, like I was saying, for example, if there isn't enough evidence in terms of what a meaningful change is on a particular measure that have been used, we can explore that. But we can then also ask them questions around the experience with the treatment. If they miss doses, and we will say this is very common, what was the circumstances around missed doses during the trial? And we can also ask them questions about the trial design and, how it was to actually participate in the trial, which of course can then be fed back to the sponsor so that they can use that to inform future trials, to ensure that trials are, over time becoming more patient-centric and, really sort of become easier for patients to fit in with their life, which then, of course, support their participation in the trial and their adherence to the trial treatment.
Yeah, because that is one of the specifics about trials also, that they can come with a burden to the patient, and that can make patients stop the trial.
Yeah. I should have said that actually with the exit interviews, that sometimes we do the exit interviews ourselves, but the process would be the same.
Yeah. Awesome. That was an outstanding discussion about adherence, how we can capture it, how we can improve it, both in clinical trials and in the real world, and how we can get much more understanding from the patients about what they are concerned about, what their problems are. And obviously, this is a big topic for anybody in clinical research. As we said, even if you work in oncology or HIV or any of the other life-threatening diseases, don't think that, compliance is a given. It's rarely a non-topic. Any final takeaways that you would like to give to the listener?
Yeah, I guess around adherence, and I think we didn't speak so much about the sort of adherence also from the patient perspective, and where we might think that, we should achieve the 100% adherence, really maximize outcomes for an individual. It's more about fitting it in with their everyday life. And that might not mean 100% adherence, even if that has an impact on outcomes. And I think, in the end of the day, it's an individual's choice to initiate, implement and persist with their treatment, but they have been prescribed. And there's some exceptions, of course, within mental health, and also now with COVID, where people might have been forced to do certain things. But most of the time, people have a choice. And I think our role as healthcare providers and medication manufacturers to ensure that individuals have accurate and understandable information to inform their choices, to support them to achieve treatment success, in what treatment success means to them, and that we really listen and act when treatments need to change, that we hear the patient's voice.
Awesome. That is a fantastic statement. Thanks so much, Lina, for this discussion. We have lots of references, of course, linked to Lina's bio, to her company, everything in the show notes. So just head over to theeffectivestatistician.com, search for Lina, for Sprout, and then you'll find that very, very easily. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Alexander.
I hope you really loved the show. If you want to learn more about this, then follow Lina, follow myself on LinkedIn, and I'm sure you'll learn much more. And check out her company, Sprout HS, which is really, really cool. This show was created in association with PSI. Thanks to Rain and her team at VVS, who helped with the show in the background. And thank you for listening. Reach your potential, lead great science, and serve patients. Just be an effective statistician.